Good evening and welcome to our Finger Lakes Wine Alliance virtual tasting series. This is our last series of this year. Tonight we're going to be featuring sparkling wine, dessert wine, and ice wines. We have with us in our first panel, we're going to be trying some sparkling wines made in a couple of different methods, and a wine called Hedonia that we're going to be telling you about in a few moments. We have a great panel in our first flight. I don't think I'll mind if I say it's probably the most experienced panel we've had here in our flight. So I'm not saying the guys are old. I'm just saying they got a lot of experience.
We started young.
They started while they were real young. That's definitely true. So what we're going to do this evening, we're going to have two flights. We're going to take some questions. And again, these guys would be great ones to throw out some questions. You get some great information from them. And our second flight tonight is going to be dessert wines. So we're going to go right ahead and get started with our first flight. The first panelist we have is Derek Wilbur, and Derek is representing Goosewatch Winery. Derek's been making wine in the Finger Lakes for many years, does a great job, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his Pinot Noir Brut Rosé. And take it away, Derek.
Thanks, Jeff, and hello, everybody. It's great to be here. The Pinot Noir Brut Rosé we make at Goosewatch. We have a family of wineries. We actually make a total of 7 different wines, sparkling wines in our group of wineries. This is one of my personal favorites. It is a varietal Pinot Noir. It is done as a very fruity, fruit-forward wine. Steve and I will talk a little bit about the different ways that sparkling wines are made. We actually make wines both through the method Champenois, bottle fermented technique, which Steve will talk a little bit more about, but we also make some wines in what's called the Charmat process. The difference between the two is basically these wines are the secondary fermentation. When we add yeast to produce the carbonation, we actually do it in pressure tanks. We make a decision based on the style of the wine, whether we're going to do one or the other. Our fruit-forward wines, like this wine in particular, we're not looking to gain any of the aging characteristics you find by storing wine on its leaves after fermentation. So we do this basically in pressure tanks. We're looking for a lot of fruit character in this. This is 75% Pinot Noir. There's actually 15% Riesling in here, and 10% of a relatively unknown variety called Lando Noir, which adds a little bit of color and some real nice berry characters to it. It's just a touch under 1% residual sugar. And it's great. It's a great aperitif wine. We also tell people it's one of my personal favorites when it comes to seafood, shellfish in particular. It's a great wine from that standpoint. The difference between this Pinot Noir and our regular still wine is the berries are all hand-picked. We don't use a machine for any of these kinds of sparkling wines, and we whole press the grapes, which is really, really important. We're trying to get the acidity right, and also looking to make sure that the wines have very, very low bitterness or phenolic extraction. That's really critical, particularly with when you're doing something out of a red grape like Pinot Noir.
So for folks who are following along, Derek, you're actually taking lugs of grapes and just physically throwing them into your press?
Well, we don't throw them
gently.
We try to put them in gently.
Gently.
And the press cycles are very different compared to what we do with still wines. Very, very little rotation on the press. Again, the whole idea here is to minimize the amount of physical movement of the grapes, to minimize the potential to break the skins in particular. So there's very few rotations on our presses. The press cycles are very, very long and slow. And then we make a very critical cut in terms of when we make a decision for what goes into our sparkling wine base and what the rest of the wine that comes off the press will be used for something else. Typically with Pinot Noir, you might be getting 175 gallons a ton if you're making a red wine with it. We're down around 100 to 110 gallons a ton is what we use just for the sparkling wine. So it's a relatively severe cut that has a big impact in terms of how it plays on your palate and in terms of the finish in sparkling wines in particular. The carbonation in sparkling wines will accent any of those minor little flaws, and so it's very, very important to be very gentle with the grapes and with the juice after fermentation.
We had a question. Did you give us the suggested retail price?
I didn't.
On that?
It's $18.
And someone had also asked about distribution, where they could find the wine.
Well, we ship throughout the United States wherever it's legal to do that. Some places it may not be completely legal to do that. And we also distributed both in New York State, Massachusetts, and a little bit in the Washington, D.C. area.
We had one question kind of specific for you, Derek, about whether Goose Watch made a still Pinot or considered making one from the vineyard this came from, and would ripening at that vineyard allow?
Actually, we do, or part of our long-term investment is actually, this is the first year, 2013, that 4 of our Pinot Noir clones actually came into production this year. 4 Dijon clones that we are making a still wine in 2013 from. We didn't do a still wine in 2012, as we always try to remind people it's farming, and there was an early frost here, or late frost, I guess, in the spring of 2012. That really had a huge effect on our Pinot Noir vineyards in particular, because they were one of the earliest vinifera varieties to come out. So we made a decision early on that we didn't think we were going to have quantity to make a still wine from those vineyards, and we actually had to go through and drop a fair amount of crop and then hand select when we picked for the Pinot Brut Rosé. So it was a decision on our part to do sparkling wine and not red wine, even though last year, 2012, was a pretty good year for red wine. But because of the spring frost issue, we thought it was best just to do a sparkling wine.
We also, Derek, had a couple of questions for the panel, especially you and Steve in this case, about whether a lot of times sparkling wine is considered a special occasion beverage.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you guys feel you have to try and change people's mindset about that in your retail shops, or you don't really worry about it, you just sell what you're producing.
There's a lot of preconceived notions about wine, and this is only one of them that we deal with on a regular basis. I think that you know, you try to convince people that it's more appropriate for what you're trying to do with the wine than the event. And I think that do we have to try to resell that? Yes, but I don't think that's unique to us. I think it's true regardless of anybody who sells sparkling wines. And all you have to do is take a look at when sparkling wines sell to know that that's still the reality. I think that something like this wine in particular, I say it all the time, that if I'm having shellfish, this is a real great companion with that, regardless of whether it's a special event or not. And I think sitting down with my wife and having clams on a Friday night is a special event anyway.
Definitely. No doubt. Well, thank you, Derek. We may come back to you to get some follow-up questions. Thanks for all the good info. We're going to move on now to Steve DeFrancesco from Glenora Wine Cellars. And Steve is going to explain a little bit about the difference in the method that he used to make his wine. He has a 2003 Brut with him tonight. And Steve, you want to take us through? And Steve, again, another one, like I said, he's a veteran in the Finger Lakes, and he's been making sparkling wine probably longer than just about anybody who's still making sparkling wine in the Finger Lakes. So again, he started when he was very young.
Yeah, very young. Thanks.
Go ahead, Steve,
Thanks,
and
Jeff.
take us through how that wine was made and a little bit maybe about the classic method.
Yep. Actually, this is grown similarly to the way Derek was saying, grown and harvested, hand-picked, and in trays, and they're put into the press and very gently pressed. And you really don't even need to spin the press because they're whole clusters, and the stems are the press aid. So with barely any pressure under 1 bar, you're going to get the 115 or so gallons per ton that you're looking for, especially out of the Pinot Noir. And then after you press that out, that goes into a different tank and becomes something else. And we actually distill that nowadays. But these grapes were from the Pinot Noir was from Sam Argetsinger's vineyard, and that was planted before he bought it. And they were old Gold Seal clones, which were champagne clones, but nobody's exactly sure what they are. But they were for sparkling wine. And then we have Pinot Blanc that we bought from Sawmill Creek, and then Chardonnay from Dalrymple Vineyard. And so we do the same cuts and then ferment the components separately and assemble that into a cuvee after everything's stabilized. And then we bottle that with yeast and sugar and cap it, and then it goes through the secondary fermentation in the bottle. We also make a few other sparkling wines using the transfer method, so there's no method that's better than the other. They're all good for what they are.
You can all make great products.
Exactly. So it just takes more handwork to do the classic method, because later on we need to get the yeast out of the bottle. We've got to riddle that to get the yeast down into the cap, then freeze the yeast into the cap, pop the yeast out, and add the dosage at that point.
So very labor intensive.
Yeah, very labor intensive, and it's really hard to do it without having to charge. Ours is $24.95 or $99 per bottle. So, and our others that are made with the transfer method, we're able to make those for $15, and they're very fine products too. So there's nothing wrong with
So
that.
one question, Steve, like the folks might be following along and noticing the 2003 vintage. What benefit did that wine gain with the extended aging that you gave that?
Well, that's sort of like the prestige cuvées of Champagne, France, and they're left on the yeast for an extended time. And we also disgorge 4 times a year as needed, so they're short time after disgorging they're available because it doesn't necessarily get better. I mean, after disgorging for about 6 weeks, it gets better, and then it's full of CO2, so it's a long, slow decline. And they last a long time, but they really don't improve that much after disgorging. So we keep the disgorging fairly recent before release.
What makes the Finger Lakes a good region? Why are we making sparkling wine in the Finger Lakes?
Well, you can look at the history, and this area from the 1800s up till Prohibition was very sparkling dominated, and the wineries would bring in people from France to be the winemakers, and we made incredible sparkling wines, and we survived Prohibition, not making sparkling, but in creative ways, and after that, there were still great sparkling wines being made. In fact, in the California State Fair in 1950, the winner overall turned out to be a Gold Seal New York sparkling wine. So they had to close the competition to anybody outside of California after that. We were making great sparkling wines in this area without the classic varieties. And Charles Fournier always had the dream at Gold Seal to bring in classic varieties and make sparkling wine. And he found land on the east side of Seneca Lake that always had beautiful catawbas that would come in, and so he bought that land when that was available, planted that over to some of the early vinifers in the area, and Dr. Frank helped him with that. Not with that vineyard, but helped him get vinifer going in this area.
We had another question, Steve, about the sweetness of the sparkling wine. How you determine where that residual sugar is going to be stopped?
Well, actually, the sweetness goes in with the dosage because it should ferment dry in the tirage. So, but that's one of the things that we can do as with our multiple disgorgings is we can fine tune that dosage as we go. So
you could do trials with your dosage
yes,
beforehand.
Yes, but more than that is what we start disgorging when we first release that vintage might be different than what it might be toward the end. So we might.
So as that wine's evolving,
yes, we might
use a different amount of sweetness.
Yes, we might usually put a little bit less dosage in toward the end as it's involved.
Very neat. And could you describe it all to people what character they would be looking for in sparkling wine that was on the lees for a long time?
Yes, you'd be getting the complexity from the yeastiness and a little bit less fruit. I think both ways are wonderful and pretty neat in their own ways, and our other products are more fruit-driven than this. But with this, we're looking for as the fruit ages and the complexity comes up, and we're getting toasty, biscuity, champagne-like flavors from the yeast as they evolve.
And this particular wine, how can folks get their hands on some?
We're distributed very well in New York, in upstate New York, and in Metro New York too. A few places outside of New York, but otherwise it's available through the internet. Where we're many states, I can't tell you exactly, but if you get on the website, it's pretty available in many states.
Very good. Well, lots of good info, and again, Steve, if we get some more questions come back in, we'll come back to you. And just one, let me just ask you your thought on the same question I asked Derek about the special occasion category of sparkling wine.
Well, as Derek said, there's lots of special occasions that can happen all week long if your mind is there. But as he said, it tends to be the sales tend to be higher during the holidays, and I think there's lots of times when it's very appropriate. It's great with shellfish, but it's also good with chicken and lasagna too. So there's not too much the sparkling doesn't go with, and that's one thing that's a little different about it than other types of wine.
If I can pipe in here, a lot of people think that once a bottle of sparkling wine is open, it has to be drunk on that very occasion. And it's actually something that's very easy to keep over 2 or 3 days. If you put the cork back in, keep it cold, and it's often even better the next night. So thinking that it's a kind of freshness dated product is a little bit of a misapprehension.
Definitely, your wine shops are all going to carry a little champagne stoppers that are pretty effective at keeping it fresh. Well, on that note, since Peter just chimed in there, we're going to move on to our third wine tonight. Thanks a lot, Steve. We have Peter Bell with us tonight from Fox Run Vineyards. And Peter, another great winemaker, makes a variety of different styles of wines. And he brought along a specialty product with him this evening called Hedonia. And to be honest, tonight was the first time that I've tried the wine, and so I'm going to let Peter tell him all about it. I thought it was a pretty neat package and a real nice wine. I'm going to let Peter give you all the info. We have Peter Bell here.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so a bit of an oddball product here, and we do spend a lot of time explaining where this wine fits into the repertoire of wines. It's not, as if you've tasted it already, you probably can tell that it's not a dessert wine. It's not sweet and unctuous. Not a table wine, so that leaves aperitif or cocktail wines, and that's pretty much what I had in mind when I invented this. Going back about 2.5 years ago, I had a very small amount of Traminette wine. Traminette I'll talk about in a minute. 200 or 300 gallons, which is a tiny amount for a commercial winery, and nothing particular to do with it. And being a kind of inveterate tinkerer, I decided I would see what would happen if it got a little extra alcohol and a touch of little more sugar. And within half an hour, I figured I'd have something pretty interesting. So I took it down to Scott Osborne, the owner, and he took one sip and he said, "I don't know what it is, but you can bottle this up as long as we can come up with a name for it." So the background is that we do all kinds of great wines in the Finger Lakes. There are those who say that our biggest strength would be aromatic white wines, i.e. Riesling, Gewürztraminer, a few others, and this falls within that category. But it is a fortified wine, so it's a little bit of an outlier.
So it's made from the Traminette grape. One of our questions was someone had asked where Traminette came from.
Right. Okay. Well, it's half American and half European. That the European part, as you probably can figure out, is Gewürztraminer. One of the parents is Gewürztraminer. There aren't sexes when you have crossings. They're just one of the parents. So the other one is a nameless grape. It has a number, and it was developed in Illinois, of all places. This cross was, and the other parent is called Johannes 723.416. So don't go into a wine shop and ask for a bottle of that stuff. It's never made into wine, but it confers a lot of very important viticultural aspects to the grape. Makes Gewürztraminer a little more cold hardy. It makes it a little more productive and easier to grow in places like Illinois, which is where it was originally planted. I don't think they plant much of it anymore in there, but we have taken it over in the Finger Lakes, and we're making some pretty good table wines out of it, as well as fortified.
So people, serving suggestion for this, Peter, like.
I did a lot of work on that, and people aren't necessarily used to the idea of a cocktail wine. I'm not saying it needs to go into cocktails, i.e. mixed drinks, although that has been pretty popular, an idea in New York City. But something before dinner, chilled down, and you can see that we have, the lucky guys at the table have a chilled glass with a little bit of orange zest inside. And I think once you try it, it sort of makes perfect sense. There's a little snappiness there, not unctuously sweet, so it's not going to kind of tire your palate out. And that little bit of alcohol makes it sort of like a cocktail.
Neat. And the price on that, Peter?
$10 a half bottle.
And besides the winery, do you have distribution on that wine?
No,
also?
we don't push this too much. People can get the easiest way, as these guys have talked about, is getting hold of us at the winery, and we can ship it.
So the best way would probably be just go on your website, and
Absolutely.
they can link right to it.
Mm-hmm.
Any inspiration for the name Hedonia, other than what might come to mind?
Well, yeah, funny you should ask. We went through a lot of agony over this. Originally, I was lying in bed, which is where I do most of my best thinking, and I decided I would kind of riff off the Chanel No. 5 idea, because it is a very perfumey wine, and I don't wear perfume, but I'm aware of Chanel No. 5, and I decided to call this Fortified No. 3, because we make 2 other fortified wines. And we were all ready to go, had a nice label design and everything. And then the government agency, which vets these things, said, no, you're not allowed to use the word fortified on a bottle of wine. And we were incredulous. We didn't want to call it port because that's kind of a place name in Portugal. So we said, well, what's wrong with using fortified? And they said, well, that implies that it will get you drunk faster. And you can't do that, even if it may be the case.
Even if it is.
So Hedonia was a last-minute switch, and it's a sort of it's a neologism, a made-up word.
That's definitely a cool story. The one last question that someone had asked us about, Peter, was like the ageability of that wine.
Okay, it's the answer is I haven't seen any sign of bottle tiredness at all. This has been in the bottle for a couple of years now. Generally speaking, wines with that amount of alcohol go for a long time.
So people could hold on to it and not expect too big of a difference.
Right.
Very good. You guys have done such a great job. I think we're going to wrap you guys up a little early here. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. You guys did a great job, and we'll take a break, and we'll be back with our second round of panelists in a few moments.
Thanks, Jeff.
Welcome back. We're getting ready to start our second flight of the night. We've got some delicious dessert wines for you to try in our second flight. We have a couple of different styles that we have. We have traditional ice wine and a couple of wines that are made with grapes frozen after harvest. And we have our representatives who will talk a little bit about the different styles. And like I said, I think if you enjoy dessert wines, you're really going to enjoy this flight. There's some great stuff here, and it really showcases something that I believe the Finger Lakes does a great job with. First up in our second flight, we have from Cayuga Lake Thirsty Owl Wine Company, Sean Kime. Sean does a great job. I've mentioned when he's been on here before, like he's one of the hardest working guys I know in the industry in the Finger Lakes. He does a little bit of everything for Thirsty Owl. And Sean is going to be featuring his 2012 Cabernet Sauvignon ice wine. I think it's intriguing because you don't see a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon ice wines. So I'm sure Sean will be looking forward to some feedback tonight, some questions. And Sean, why don't you go ahead and tell us how that wine's made and give people a little info about the traditional method of making ice wine.
Okay. So this is made in the traditional method, which means we leave the grapes on the vine to freeze, pick them frozen, and press them frozen. This particular wine stayed on until about the 3rd of January, 2012. We picked it. It was actually the perfect conditions. It was 14 degrees when we picked it. It was 14 degrees all day long. It was 14 degrees the next day. We did 2 press loads of it. We were able to hold on to it, and the temperature never changed. Fortunately, when we went to clean up the press, it came up to 50 degrees, and we had nice conditions for that too. So that being said, that's probably the only time we'll ever have those conditions to make traditional style ice wine, which is the downside of doing it. There's a lot of risk involved in it. Animal loss is one of the biggest things, rot on the vine. So we have to go through some extra steps. Controlling disease is really important. Bird netting, preventing animals, keeping animals out of the vineyard is a big deal. The first time we ever made it, we didn't really know what we were doing. It was a large-scale experiment, and we had a lot of animal loss in it. Speaking of that, I know a lot of people are wondering why we make a Cabernet Sauvignon ice wine. There is a reason for that, actually. Most people look at me like I have three heads when I tell them that it's made out of Cabernet Sauvignon. But the reason we do it, we did it for the first time in 2009. We had some extra Cabernet Sauvignon grapes, and we wanted to experiment with making ice wine. Some people were making Cabernet Franc ice wine, so we figured why not. We left a portion of our vineyard out and made about 100 cases of it that first year. Turned out really nice. It had a lot of really nice raspberry, strawberry characters, really nice texture, and it sold out really quick. And we had a lot of people wanting it again. So we had done it to learn how to make ice wine, thinking that we would do Riesling down the road. But to do Riesling the traditional method, I think would be very, quite challenging to get the grapes to actually stay on the vine that long. So we've just stuck with Cab Sauv and done that for three times now.
So, have you guys experimented with any other varietals of the ice wine, Sean?
No, we haven't. No, we still haven't tried it with Riesling yet. So.
And do you think, like, one of the questions was true ice wine? Do you feel that you guys will be able to make that every year?
So far, I'd say yes. We need, we need the right conditions. We've actually had days where we thought we'd have the right conditions, and it was actually too cold. So it is challenging, but generally over the course of the winter, you'll find the time where you have the right conditions to do it. Just hope those right conditions aren't Christmas Day or something like that. So far, that hasn't been the case. But yeah, it seems to me so far that we can do that on a normal basis. If it doesn't happen, we have a fallback. We can just go ahead and pick the grapes and freeze them. So.
Definitely. Distribution for that wine and the price of it?
It's $39.95 per 375 milliliter bottle, and the price is probably a lot higher than some other ice wines, in part because of the things we go to make it the traditional way.
Also, some people may not be aware of how many days did you press that ice wine for?
This particular one, each press load took 2 days.
Okay, and I think it's not unusual with some, maybe Marty or John might chime in. I've heard of people taking 4 or 5 days to press their ice wine.
The most recent one we made was in the press for 5 days.
So it's not unusual. So it all leads, to some sleepless nights, and something you got to keep your eye on. But it really is an unusual product, and I think you should be applauded for trying something different. And got another question coming in. The inspiration, I think Sean someone just asked what your inspiration was, and it sounded like for you guys, initial inspiration was extra grapes.
Yeah.
And then experimentation to try something different, and then you got good feedback because it turned out well.
Yeah, and 09 was not a great red year, so it was a good year to try something like that. And sometimes you do an experiment and it works out, and you can stick with it. So that's pretty much what happened with it, and it's worked out very well for us. It's a really fun wine to make. We make a lot of larger quantities of certain wines, but making 150 cases of something like this is really a lot of fun. It makes this pretty interesting.
The other thing that some people may not be aware of is not only are you concentrating the sugar, but like what makes Finger Lakes wines also nice ice wines is that acidity that's in the grapes is getting concentrated. And I think that's going to help with all 3 of these wines when people are tasting them. Well, Sean, thank you very much. If we get any other questions, we're going to zip back to you. And I just wanted to. People had asked about. I know this is relatively new for you, but they'd asked about ageability of the ice wines, and maybe something.
I'm probably going to defer.
Okay, we'll get a couple of these guys who've made them for a little bit longer. But thank you very much, Sean. And next up we have the owner of Standing Stone Vineyards, Marty Nasinski. And Marty, like our next panelist, is what I would call a very hands-on owner. So she's an owner, winemaker, business partner, involved in all aspects of the business. And Marty brought with her this evening her 2011 Vidal Ice. And Standing Stone has a great reputation for the dessert wines. When Marty was on here last time, I think I mentioned I'd been to a tasting with 3 of Standing Stone's ice wines, and they were 3 of my favorite wines at that tasting. So Marty's going to tell us a little bit about how the wine was made and maybe some things that she does different in making a wine in a different style than Sean did. So go ahead, Marty. Welcome.
Thank you. We definitely do differently than Sean and the Thirsty Owl crew, because we learned about 20 years ago that we really don't like picking frozen grapes. But not as much that we don't like it, but that it is very impractical, except on a very small scale. So we made our very first real ice wine in 1995, and for the next 3 years we watched as the birds, the coyotes, the deer, and the wind took all the grapes away. So while we were not having any grapes to make frozen dessert wines out of, we researched the idea of freezing commercially, and which led us to writing about winemaking in Australia, where there are a lot of stickies, as they call them. And we concluded, after reading all the research, or they concluded, and we thought it made sense, that the really important thing is not how the grapes freeze, but that they are frozen, that they're frozen in the press. And then most importantly, that once, however you've gotten them frozen and through the press, you really have to pay attention because this is a very tough product to make. You're putting yeast into, yeast doesn't like 3 things. It doesn't like sugar, it doesn't like alcohol, and it doesn't like cold. So we're starting with 2 and we're building the 3rd almost immediately. So it's a truly hostile environment for winemaking. So we take it a little easy on ourselves. We pick the grapes late harvested, we freeze them commercially, we bring them back and we press in the winter, which most people think is insane, but there actually is some free time in the winter. So we press when it's cold outside, they stay cold in the press, and we get very, very concentrated juice. And then we work really hard to make sure the fermentation happens very, very well. We want a clean, straight through fermentation. We want a lot of clean flavors. We don't want a lot of funky things sitting around and working on problems. So we really pay attention, and we think the result is a wine that is very well balanced. We constantly have people telling us, oh, this isn't as sweet as the other dessert wines. And I tell them, well, it really is. But we're taking advantage of, as you mentioned, the natural acidity that comes from freezing. We've got higher acidity that brings everything in balance. And if you have good, clean fermentation, you've got excellent flavors. And people really, really, really like these products if they can afford them. And the way we do it, and we think the way the Wagners do it, it's a much more affordable product, and so it's something that people don't have to think twice about when they open, and so we actually sell a fair amount of it.
So what was the suggested retail price?
$24.99, and through our distributor and out in the market, it's actually often much cheaper than that. You know, often, frequently, right around $20 a half bottle.
And where are the ice wines distributed?
We're very well distributed in upstate New York, increasing our distribution in Metro New York and New Jersey with our new distributor, and then we're in 16 other states, kind of around the country.
Scattered around?
And usually the Vidal Ice is the first product that a new distributor wants from us, that and our Riesling.
Is there a link on the website that shows what states?
It shows all our distributors and
great.
how to find them.
And for you, Marty, you guys have had a chance. You've been making the wines for a while. The ageability of these wines.
We actually opened in 2008 a 20-year-old bottle of a real Vidal ice wine from this farm, a Great Western Vidal ice wine. So it was 20 years old, and it was on New Year's Day, and it was spectacular.
Great.
Little brown. It was slightly disconcerting because it came out looking like tea, and we all said, well, what the heck, it's open, we might as well try it. and it was really, really a special experience. And we understand from a lot of Europeans with both ice wines and dessert wines that 30, 40 years is not at all uncommon. So hang on to a few. They're worth it.
Has climate change affected production of your ice wines?
Not for us because we're not freezing on the vine. I think if we were freezing on the vine, it would be very, very difficult because with the quantities that we're doing, if you're making 100 cases, you might be able to pick it all in a day and get it into the press. But when you're talking 400, 500, 600 cases or more, that's just not doable when you have a 1 or 2 day window of time, unless you own a lot of presses and have a really large crew, which we don't. So I think it's increasingly difficult, but that's really not the reason we chose to do it this way. It was really a choice of making a product at a price that we thought was very marketable and that people would enjoy at that marketable price. And we find that a lot of people buy a bottle and decide that they want to come back for another one because they actually open it and drink it and enjoy it. And that's the whole point.
Are the dessert wines, ice wines, affected by the growing season as much as a still wine, a regular table wine?
Normally I would have said no, but the 11 is kind of funny because I'm famous for saying Vidal doesn't get botrytis. You can't put botrytis in Vidal, it won't stick to it. 11 proved me wrong. We had a lot of botrytis in it. So the variations in the growing season and the strangeness of when wetness comes and how it sticks, I think, is affecting all of our grapes. And it just means we have to watch the dessert wines more carefully and maybe pick a little earlier if we want to avoid rot type of issues.
Very good. Lots of good information, Marty.
And actually, the one thing you didn't ask, but it is a good question, and a lot of people ask it and find it kind of fun. Everybody assumes you only drink a dessert wine with dessert or for dessert. And a classic pairing that we've done time and time again at the winery and won many converts is to put any of the ice or ice style wines with blue cheese. And the good news is there's a lot of actually pretty cool Finger Lakes blue cheeses coming out now too as the cheese industry is growing. And it's just, people will say, I don't like dessert wines, I don't like sweet wines, and I hate blue cheese, but together it's a really truly magical combination. So I hope everybody will try it.
I'm gonna go backwards a second. Sean, did you have any pairing you like with the Cab Sauv?
Well, we were talking about that today, and really dark fudge.
Yep,
Or a fudge type brownie.
I could see that being real nice.
Yeah.
Well, Marty, thank you very much. And if I get any other questions here, we'll come back to you. Lots of good info. Next up, we have another longtime Finger Lakes veteran who, like Marty, John does a little bit of everything for Wagner Vineyards. Owner, he oversees the vineyard, oversees the whole production, and does a great job, makes some excellent wines in this style and a variety of other styles. Wagner Vineyards is one of the larger producers in the Finger Lakes, and anybody who's ever driven down past John's farm knows that he has a beautiful vineyard, gorgeous looking vineyard, and I think John takes a lot of pride in that. And they start out with great fruit, make great wine.
Thanks.
And so you want to tell us a little bit, John, about your wine this evening. And in this case, we have our first Riesling dessert wine, and we have a 2012 Riesling Ice.
Sure. So we've been producing ice wines for almost 30 years, and we've tried it all different methods, and we've concluded for Riesling being a thinner skinned, a little more temperamental once it gets to that ripeness level, that the Finger Lakes offers too many partial freeze-thaw cycles for us. So when we, if we get down to 14 degrees and it stays there like the perfect night that Sean had, that was ideal. But very rarely do we see that. We oftentimes will get down close to the ideal temperature. We would get down to 18, 19, but then it warms up to 40 during the day, and those partial freeze-thaw cycles can really degrade that skin quality. So what we prefer to do is all our wines are estate bottled, so they're coming off our farm. We got complete control over the growing conditions. This is a single vineyard. It comes off of our Kaywood West vineyard. It's clone 198. We like that clone. It tends to be a little higher bricks. So we'll sample frequently, try to catch them at the peak of ripeness when the flavors are there. The condition of the fruit is excellent. The skins still have their integrity. We hand pick and we commercially freeze it very quickly. So we're trying not to juice up the berries when we hand pick so that we don't have a lot of juice skin contact at that point. Once they're completely frozen, we usually after a couple of weeks that we'll reach that temperature where they're really down there. Then we'll bring them back in a cool stretch of weather and press them out. So the pressing, as everybody's mentioned here, the temperature is critical. If they're at 10 degrees, you can sit there for days and days and days. If they're 25, they're too warm. So there's a real sweet spot where you got to get into the 14, 15, 16 range degrees Fahrenheit, and then it's kind of magical watching it happen and watching the juice come out, the concentrated juice. So that's how we do it, and we really like the fruit forward character that we get, the bright fruit out of there. We get a lot of peach and nectarine in there, and maybe not quite as much of the butterscotch and the honey that you might get out of a Canadian Riesling ice wine with a lot of botrytis in there. So we like it, our customers like it, and we're also at the $24.99 price range.
And where can people find it, John?
So we're distributed throughout New York State and in Metro New York, and we're also with Total Wine and More, which is in 16 states throughout the country, and we also ship wherever it's legal to do so.
Great. So a lot of people can get their hands on that wine.
And we made 1,100 cases of the 2012 Riesling.
And that's for Finger Lakes is a lot of ice wine. Do you find too, John, that making it out of the Riesling, which is kind of our Finger Lakes #1 varietal, that it kind of helps to have that name on there too?
Absolutely. We also make a Vidal, which is really well suited for ice wines, but just having the Riesling, it helps us showcase the versatility of that variety because it's the variety that we have the most of on our farm, and we're able to make a bone dry Riesling with nice minerality all the way up through this with 21% residual sweetness. So it's an amazing versatile grape, and we love it. But definitely that name, there's a lot of people that carries a lot of weight with them.
And do you and your family, what do you enjoy with the Riesling ice wine?
Yeah, I mean, it's great with a lot of desserts, but with fresh fruit and soft cheeses, as Marty mentioned, nuts. It's always on the table at Thanksgiving. I mean, it just goes with so many different things, and it really does go with it doesn't have to always be dessert. You can drink, and at that price point, we've seen a lot more acceptance of people, not waiting to open it only on, Christmas Eve or whatever. So.
And has your family had a chance to try some of those older bottlings to see how they were holding up?
Absolutely. We have a wine library at the winery, and one of the things I would say is the cork, and you got to have a real high quality cork for that ageability, and we use the DM5, which is a high quality cork, and we've had similar results. We've opened up stuff that's 10, 15 years old, and it's amazing. Darker color, and the flavors will change. Some of that fruit forward, that peach, might melt away a little bit, and you get a lot more of the syrupy and the sweeter flavors are harmonizing together. But you lose a little bit of that bright fruit.
So it's kind of can develop some complexity, just like our older Rieslings.
Yeah, you get more of the honey in there. And I will caution too, if you do have the chance to save a bottle and open a 15-year-old bottle of wine, that is not a bottle that's going to be in your refrigerator for 2 or 3 days. Those older bottles, they will go down, they will degrade
Within a
quickly.
couple hours,
Yeah,
right?
so
So
you know, you gotta, yeah. You have
open
to
it
have
up
some-
when you have some friends
have some
over
friends
and
together.
pass it around.
It's a really special experience, but you know they last for, they're fleeting. They
Yep.
last for.
Yeah.
Well, we got lots of great information.
But
Super
conversely,
panelists
a
and-
good point about the young ones, and this I think is a selling point for some of us to the restaurants now, is these do hold up very well open for several days. When they're young, you know, not a 10 or 15-year-old, but a 1,
Definitely.
2, 3-year-old. The restaurant can open it, can serve it, and can offer it by the glass, knowing that it will hold up and be fine. I joke, I actually lost a bottle in the fridge for 4 months once because I ate things going in, and I pulled it out and said, well, I might as well try it, and it was fine. It
We don't
wasn't.
recommend holding
We don't
it for
recommend
that
that,
long.
and I don't know how I lost it that long, but
Once you open one of these, you're not going to keep it that long anyway.
Right.
You're going to drink it. Well, again, tons of great information, and on behalf of the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance, we appreciated you bloggers joining us this evening, and we look forward to having you on a future tasting with us. And thank you to this panel; you did a great job. And one last thank you to Stephanie Jarvis, who organized this and did a great job all year with our tasting series. And thank you. We'll see you next year.
Thanks, Jeff.
thanks.
Good job.